ironed out, but if there's any more, I apologise in advance. This is day 2, and my name is Gregor Howitt. I'm a financial advisor of 28 years experience, and yes, I did start when I was 12. And I run my own business with 9 staff based in offices in Aberdeen and Orkney. And I'm delighted to be your host today as we pick up the baton that was passed by our 2 great informed speakers yesterday. I hope you caught it, either here live or on social media. We had Jeremy McCoy and Neil McMillan, 2 gifted pastors who did some great teaching and also gave us a lot to think about. I did notice that they did get some of the questions about our topic today, which they answered very well. So I would recommend that you watch this as a good addition to what we're going to speak about in a few minutes. Today is all about the harvest and how can we effectively be the salt and the light in our workplaces? How can we reap and distribute what God is sowing into us in our offices, the shops, the staff rooms, the pubs, wherever COVID restrictions allow us to be? It is an easy thing to say, certainly on a Sunday morning, but perhaps it's not so easy to do Monday to Friday. To discuss this, and also to help us unpack the subject with some practical tips, experiences, and maybe some words of wisdom, I've got 2 fantastic guests to join us on this virtual fireside discussion. We've got Ruth Walker from the LICC, and we've got Kieran Turner from the Evangelical Alliance. If yesterday was the 3 pastors, then today it's the 3 fruit soldiers. So as I get Ruth and Kieran to introduce themselves, we'll do a little Thrive 2020 first. It's our first poll, and we really want to engage with you and find a little bit about you. And so in a couple of minutes, there'll be 3 questions coming up on the screen. And it would be great if you could please answer each of these, and we'll share some of the findings at the end. Also, to keep the dialogue throughout our discussion, please use the chat function, which you should see on the right-hand side of your screen, to give us some positive encouragement, to let us know that you're out there, and also to ask any questions. And please do ask us questions, and we'll incorporate them in our talk today. Our moderator, Barry, will be overseeing all that, and he'll be able to put the questions through to us. So without further ado, can I introduce Ruth Walker? Ruth, welcome, and just start by telling us a little bit about yourself, also about the LICC, and also what you enjoy most about your current role.
So I've had a long career in the private and public sector, and now what I spend most of my time on is as a non-executive director of a number of different charities. Some are Christian charities and some are not. I'm also a mentor and a facilitator. The passion of my heart is to help people discover God's purposes for them in the workplace, and that God calls each of us to work and has given us a role there to do. And that's why I volunteer with the London Institute of Contemporary Christianity as their transforming work ambassador. LICC, what we do is we're really trying to help people understand what's the culture around us, how do we understand it, how do we live and work into it. And we do a lot of work, particularly around the workplace, as we think that's the place that people spend so much of their time and where you can have so much influence. And I love it because I get to speak about Jesus and the difference that he makes where we are.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for that, Ruth. I don't know if we've got Kieran. Is Kieran there on the line yet? Do we have Kieran? We are meant to have Kieran from the Evangelical Alliance, but
Kieran's been having some technical difficulties problems. Getting on, so hopefully soon.
I wonder if the poll, could we end the poll there and just have a look at the results, if that's possible? Right, let's just have a little look at the poll results. This will be quite interesting. Question 1 was, what is the sector of your current or most recent work position? So what have we got? We've got a lot of others, which I knew you'd have a lot of others because we can't put everything in there. So we've got 56% in there, but of the remainder, banking and finance. So we've got a lot of banking and finance people, about 18, nearly 19% in there. Nobody from retail. The next biggest, it's almost equal between education and the oil industry. So, it looks like a good spread that we've got in there. Let me just have a little look at the second question. Question 2, a little bit looking at the age. I know a lady doesn't want to tell her age, so we thought we'd do this anonymously. Let's just have a look here. So we've got a lot of people, what I would call mid-career. There's a lot of people probably from 41 to 50. That's the biggest single one there. And then the second's 31 to 40 there, Ruth. So it looks like we've got a real spread. And we've got a few people in the prime of their life who are over 60. So that's really good. And the biggie one, I suppose, how many Christians are you aware of in your current workplace? And obviously there's quite a few who've got none. So they're sort of there on their own, which is something that we'll talk quite a bit about, I think. And obviously there's some who've got a lot of people who are Christians in their workplace. I suspect we've got a few ministers and people in full-time ministry. So there'll be a few in there. But yeah, a lot in the 1 to 5, Ruth. So that seems to be, there we go. We've got Kieran. Oh, we did have Kieran. So that's quite an interesting mix there. So thanks for taking part in the poll, everybody. That was really good to share there. And then as if by magic, we've got Kieran from the Evangelical Alliance. So we just did an introduction for Ruth there. And I was just coming over to you, Kieran. So do you want to tell us a little bit about, your current role and the Evangelical Alliance in Scotland?
Yeah, thanks, Gregor. So great to be with you. So I look after the public affairs and public leadership work of the Evangelical Alliance in Scotland. So I do all our kind of public-facing work around government, around wider society, but then I also have the great privilege of leading with a great team, of which Ruth is one of. A public leadership programme that we run in Scotland called Scottish Public Leaders, which is really a leadership community. So each year we have a kind of privilege of taking about 20 emerging leaders, looking at how we can equip them to lead whatever God has called them. But primarily that is looking at workplace leadership.
Fantastic. What's your favourite thing about the job, Kieran? What's your single thing that gives you a buzz every day?
It's probably two answers to that. I think the first one is genuinely getting to represent Jesus and the church. I get to see all the great things that happen in Scotland. At the moment, we are doing a project around what churches have been doing to support communities in lockdown. And so that has been incredible to see how Christians so often are serving their communities in amazing ways and taking opportunities in the midst of the challenge. And then the second thing is just the sheer variety of people that I get to meet. Whether that's government or civil servants or people in all different spheres, all different fields, all across Scotland and beyond. It's an incredible privilege just to get to just see some of that bigger picture and get to meet some of these amazing people.
Brilliant. No, I totally get that. Thanks for sharing that there, Kieran. Obviously, the first thing I want to do, well, we've seen the poll results there. So the first thing I did when we're planning for today was to Google the word the harvest, because obviously that's the topic for today. The secular definition came up on the search that I did, and it said, I'll read it out. It says a process or period of gathering in the crop. It then went on to say farmers work longer hours during the harvest. And then the bit that really got me most, after harvesting, most of the crop is stored in large buildings. Wow, that sounds like it could be the Christian description. We've got plenty of large buildings. So I suppose if the church is shut, that means a harvest is all out there. Well, we'll have a discussion on that, actually.
Yeah.
The biblical definition, which we'll kind of look at here, is God's provision for us and God's blessing for others. So I suppose, Ruth, with that in mind, what I've just said, what do you think is meant by the harvest in the context of being a Christian in the workplace?
So I think over the years I've been kind of quite tripped up by this, because I keep thinking it's the harvest is just about people coming to faith. But actually what I've discovered is that harvest is much more about the very work that we do. So the things that we have. And when God made us, he put us in the world to look after it and to cultivate it. That's right at the very start. That's part of our being. And well, we're not, very few of us are farmers, or some of us may be gardeners, but actually every day we're getting a chance to cultivate God's creation in our workplace. So, for example, if you are a mathematician, you're probably doing things that help create the structures or think about buildings. You're helping make things better, to grow and to make them flourish. So I think the very work that we do is harvest. Tim Keller, in his book, Every Good Endeavour, puts it like this. So let me quote it. He says, whenever we bring order out of chaos, whenever we draw out creative potential, whenever we elaborate and unfold creation beyond where it was when we found it, we're following God's pattern of creative cultural development. So I think if we're a teacher and we're working with a child and we're helping them learn new things and we see that child grow and flourish, that's harvest. I think if you're a doctor and you're helping look after and help restore somebody to health, that is also harvest. So it's those kind of things. So I think that is for me is what harvest is about. And I found that quite a liberating way to think about harvest, because the very work that I do is part of God's good harvest.
No, that's a good one. Good. Really, really like that answer there, Ruth. I suppose, Kieran, I'd probably put the same question over to yourself, just to see what you sort of think about the definition of the harvest in regards to Christians in the workplace.
Yeah, so I think I would agree with everything that Ruth said in terms of the richness, I suppose, of what we think about when we think about the kingdom, what we think about when we think about harvest. I was very structural when I was reflecting ahead of today, and just on that, I guess on the passage that we would all think of when we think about harvest, which is Jesus talking about the workers in the harvest fields, and I was struck really by the relevance of some of the words. So I wonder if, as Ruth has done, just read that out a little bit. Matthew 9, 35 to 37. And it said, Jesus went through all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom, healing every disease and every affliction. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. And then he said to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the labourers are few. Therefore, pray earnestly to the Lord of the harvest to send out labourers into the harvest. And I guess as I was reading that, I was struck by how relevant some of those words are for the moment that we're in at the moment. The fact Jesus is everywhere. He's in cities, he's in villages. We're doing this very conference in a scattered way because of the situation that we find ourselves in. The fact that there's a holistic approach. He's teaching, he's proclaiming the gospel, he's healing, he's dealing with afflictions. And then just those words, his approach of compassion, and then harassed and helpless, and on people, on a whole generation of people who don't know where they're going, who don't know what to do next. And I guess we all know, as we think about where we are at the moment, we all know plenty of people who fit into that category, might say that themselves, feel harassed by this moment, feel a bit helpless, don't know what's going to happen next. And yet Jesus calls us kind of to partner with him within that. And so I was just really struck by that the harvest it's never less than sharing the gospel and that verbal introducing people to Jesus, but it is richer and it is wider and it is more perhaps than sometimes we've thought in our church world, where all we perhaps think of in terms of the workplace is how many times have I mentioned the word Jesus when I'm going about day-to-day work.
Yes, an interesting one. It's just when you're reading there, I reflect on that passage quite a bit. The harvest is plentiful, but the labourers are few. I think I read in the Thrive literature actually that about 7.5% of Christians in the workplace go to church. So I don't quite know, is that once a year or is it regular? But it sometimes seems to me like a huge opportunity. I know that you can look at it, there's a few of us out there, but there's a huge harvest field out there for us. It's not like there's 99% of the people go to church and only 1% don't. It seems to be like a huge, huge, huge opportunity there. But
there's also some interesting research, Gregor, that indicates that there's a much higher proportion of people who may be not church going, but who are really believers in Jesus. But even if it is only a small number of us, if we are just sitting in church gathered together, we aren't a lot of use, but we are actually scattered. And I think that's the joy of the workplace, that we're scattered into so many places. And we're often the only person that people encounter who knows Jesus and is living the difference. So I think that's a really significant thing about the workplace.
No, that's a good point. I suppose it probably leads on to the next question here. We'll just start with you again, Ruth. How do you think we can create a work atmosphere where Christians can really flourish? And just if you've got any examples or stories of anything in your years of wisdom there, if there's anything you've seen, how can we really create an atmosphere where Christians flourish?
Well, I would say that the role of Christians is to create an atmosphere where other people flourish as well as Christians. So that's the primary thing that I think is really significant, and I think that's a part of our calling. So I think it's things like the principles we have, the values we display, the culture we create. These are all important things. So maybe I can give you an example. So a colleague of mine, she's in social work, and she's working in the area of mental health. It's really, really tricky at the moment. She's taken on a new job, several departments, and her boss is always like, oh. And so what she went in and she's created what she calls Good News Friday. Mm-hmm. And during the week, she searches out stories. And then on Friday, she emails her boss and says, here's the good news for Friday. And if he's having a bad week, he'll get onto her early and say, is there any good news this week? But she doesn't just do that. So she helps create a positive atmosphere, but she also goes in every week and tries to meet with every person or see everyone person, so that she's in amongst people and hears what's going on. And there's a lovely story. She's not medical, but there were nursing staff who were really trying to help, and they were understaffed one day. And she came out of her office and she said, is there anything I can do to help? And people kind of looked at her. And she said, anything. She said, can I hold a bowl? And she was given very ordinary things to do. She's a manager, but she thought, that's the thing I can do. So she has become trusted by doing that. And so I think that's a really great example. Or Kieran and I work on this program with Scottish public leaders, and part of it is we get senior leaders to come and talk about their experience. And there's one person who comes in, he's spoken about some of the principles he's driven into his life. So early on, what he and his wife decided is they would always take the holidays they had. Now in our culture, it's, oh, don't take your holidays, that shows you're really macho. But he felt that if he took the holidays, not only would he be rested and restored, but he also set the culture for what he allowed for people. And more than that, it showed he trusted people, that he didn't. So he doesn't keep his, he didn't keep always checking in. He wanted people to know that he had worked with them and he trusted them. And so these are simple things that you can do to change the culture. I guess another thing that's recently I've been a chair of an organisation, and some of the meetings are really tricky. So I've really surprised people. So I go early and try and turn it. I haven't quite worked out how to do this yet online, but if you go early, and I used to kind of sit and just kind of get the chat. And when you get the chat, you hear what's going on in people's lives. And what I found was that meetings that used to be really aggressive and unpleasant, the atmosphere started to change, and so that's just some simple things you can do.
I like that. I like the idea of the good thing on Friday. She should set up a channel on TV.
Yeah.
We need some good news. It could be just Good News Friday.
Yeah.
What about yourself, Kieran? What do you think yourself?
Yeah, in terms of opportunities. So I think we're in an incredible moment for opportunities. We're in a kind of paradox moment, I think, aren't we? Where we incredibly challenging circumstances that we're all in different ways, individually and as a community and as a nation and as a world, at every level. But yeah, incredible opportunities, I think, for the gospel. And I was talking to a colleague a couple of months ago, runs a big multinational energy company in Scotland, and right in the middle of doing big redundancies at the moment. They're in energy. Anyone working from Aberdeen knows that world at the moment. And he just said this thing. It struck me. He said, I've never known it to be so tough. He said, it's never been as hard, but I've also never known so many opportunities for the gospel. And for him, so for him, it was about how he was leading the business in that moment. For him, it was about actually how he was making people redundant, and actually taking the time to phone as many people as he could. He said, the business is like a family, but also these people have all got families, and actually we can't keep them all on, because we need it the health of the business for everyone that's left, but how is it that we go about with a way of integrity and bringing some of those Christian values, some of that those kingdom, the fruit of the spirit of what I'm trying to live out into something as difficult as a redundancy process. So I think, that's probably if you like, the extreme end of the opportunities. I think but I think there are huge amounts of opportunity in terms of what does it look like for us to be people alongside our colleagues that actually have hope in this moment, actually have some certainty, have an identity that goes beyond our own workplace, have an identity that goes beyond our own, even what happens, even beyond death and sickness, which is obviously the feature of where we are just now, to actually see that fragrance and to live that out where we are, sharing verbally and doing practical things to live out that hope that we have.
No, it's funny. I was just going to talk about the fruit of the Spirit. Galatians 5. I've got it written up on my wall here because I don't remember all 9 of them. And it's funny. I try to use that as a sort of mantra that I look at. And a wee example from my own business. Obviously with lockdown, it was quite a dramatic event. We worked from being in the office, all of us, all the time, to suddenly not being in the office at all. So the thing that I thought we need to do is get communication. Really, we need to be speaking to each other face to face if possible. And it's quite difficult in an office in Orkney and one in Aberdeen. So we set up a Teams meeting every day. Teams is a bit like Zoom for those that don't know it. And it's but it was not business related. So every morning we spend between 20 minutes to half an hour. And it's just a bit of fun, a bit of a chat, a bit of what's going on in people's lives. But it's absolutely nothing to do with work. And it's, we've done that every day from sort of, beginning of March right through to now. And I think it has brought a lot of joy. I think there's been a fair bit of love and, a bit of laughter going in there. But our staff, we did a bit of feedback in a meeting and they said, no, we want to keep this going. This is something we need to keep going post-COVID, because we used to just speak through email to the 2 offices separated by the water there. But now they want to keep doing it. And our relationship's actually grown stronger, as a team in COVID as a result of that. So it's just a little example that we've done. And I thought it might be worth sharing because, it's even just a little communication every day, it's powerful. And I think it's brought us together a bit better.
I think that's really helpful, Gregor. And one of the things I think as well as a Christian you can do is be really attentive to what's going on in other people's lives. And as you note, things like weddings and funerals are just amazing opportunities to say something. And I've done quite a bit of work to try and just do a handwritten note or something that's different than being online and something that's not an email. Sometimes I've kind of, you're a bit struggling with GDPR if you're allowed people's home addresses. So I've often used a secretary or an HR person to kind of help and maybe given the cards to them so as I don't get to see them, but they can be sent out. And just trying to think of different ways where people know that you've really paid attention to the things that are important, and then they know that you value them and they take what they really take quite seriously when you do that.
And I think it is little things. It doesn't need to be, a huge earth-shattering. Just a small little thing can make a big difference. But that's good. Another question for you, Kieran, if I may. How do you think we can best display and maybe articulate our beliefs and our ethos, not just with our immediate colleagues, but with our bosses, our suppliers, clients, and probably even broader, looking at local government and leaders? How do you take it to that next level? I'd be interested to hear what your experience or thoughts are there.
Yeah, so I think there's two aspects to it, and I think there's an individual aspect and there's a corporate aspect, and I think as individuals it's about our character and it's about knowing our context, and again I think Tim Keller's really helpful on some of this stuff in Every Good Endeavour about asking the right questions of your context. What are the stories that are going on individually? What are the idols that are in the workplace that we're in? What are the background? Why do people think the way they think? What's the story that's brought it? And there's no shortcut to that, and nor should there be, actually, because we're called to love people. This is not a sort of project based thing, you know, of somehow actually if we just have the right formula, the right thing, we're called to actually get to know folk and to understand their stories and to hear where they are. And so I think knowing your context is absolutely vital. I think also your own character, fairly obviously, and how we live that, how you exhibit the fruit of the Spirit, what your integrity looks like. And then I guess when we think at on a corporate level, I think that's more about culture. And how do we bring kingdom culture into our organisation? How do what does it look like for our organisation to be more generous, more gracious, more kind? So how do we exhibit that? And then I think probably from all of those things together, we've got a good platform then to think through, to understand where we are, and to think through how we speak and how we engage and how we do well. And I guess my final comment, and it comes, I suppose, from all the work that I do in terms of engaging with politicians, with ministers and civil servants, and I guess it's this point of relationship particularly before confrontation or before challenge. And I think so often, politicians so often are on the receiving end of confrontation, and often, and sadly often from Christians, where perhaps the first engagement, they don't know who this person is that's written to them, but the first thing they get is telling them all the things that they're doing wrong without any kind of relationship that's been built. And so I think the principle probably stands in every workplace. It's just that's the one where I tend to see it the most of actually what does it look like to build deep and fruitful and strong relationships with colleagues that then allows deeper conversations. And at times there's going to be differences, and at times there's going to be challenge both ways, but the relationship is there in the first place to make that happen.
No, I appreciate that. Okay. You any take on that, Ruth, at all?
Well, I think the things about relationships are hugely significant, and that's one of the things about a workplace. I mean, often many of us are there for many years, and I worked for a while at Scottish Enterprise. I was there for about 20 years, so it's a long time, and so you can be authentic in it. Now, I think one of the reasons people get kind of get nervous about speaking up about their faith is because they think, oh, well, I've made mistakes, or I'm going to be asked really hard questions. I think there's a lot more about being willing to be vulnerable, or willing to say you're sorry, or where you've made a mistake, and be really upfront about that. I can think of things, kind of feel hot at the thought, of some of the mistakes that you've made. But I think as you apologize, or as you see people see you trying to live differently, they see authenticity in you. And I also think because you have relationship, that you really get an opportunity for people to read your life, I think, and see what's going on. At LICC, one of the things we've developed is this sort of the 6 M's, or you might have read about it in our book, the fruitfulness in the front line. And they're kind of things that it's the whole story. It's not just speaking about your faith, but it's what's your experience. So there's sort of 6 things we would talk about. Are you modeling godly character, like Kieran was talking about? Do people see that in you? Are you doing good work? So you might not be the best at your work, but are you doing your best at work? Are you ministering grace and love? Are you being a mouthpiece for truth and justice? Are you molding culture, as well as are you speaking up about what you actually believe, you being a messenger of the gospel? I think these are some sort of significant things. So, I mean, I would really encourage people not to be afraid to speak about some of the challenges you have, even around faith. People have been saying a lot at the moment that you've got to be a non-anxious presence. And I've been quite anxious about that because I'm feeling anxious. So it's actually being able to say, I do feel anxious, but my hope is in something different. So you're being honest, but you're talking about the bigger truth in that.
That's interesting. One of the things, I was just thinking there, one of the things I noticed, although I run my own business, I work alongside a FTSE 100 company. And about a year and a half ago, there was a couple of us got together because I felt we need to do something we need to come together as Christians, but in an organisation with 15,000 people globally, and you only meet a few of them. But thankfully, I spoke to Roz Walker from Transform Work UK, and Roz put me in touch with a guy who just moved to our head office down south. And so I had a conversation with him, and he introduced me to another guy down in London. and the three of us started a weekly Skype where we sort of prayed. And it's amazing, other people start to come to the group there. We're probably up to about 20, and there's probably some actually watching this today. But the bit I was thinking about, the how can you affect culture or the bosses or senior management? We obviously prayed for the company. We prayed a lot for the company. And it did hit, there was a couple of things happened in the organization. And so I thought, I'm going to send an email to the managing director and tell them that we've got a group here who've been praying for them. And I just did it. And it was a prompt from God. And I just sent him, and I thought, oh, that's me. I'm going to be fired or struck off or something like that. And as far as I know, this guy's not a Christian. But, he came back and he said, look, really appreciate that you guys are praying for us. And, he's now aware of our group and he respected it. And obviously with the COVID, we've seen a softer side to the FTSE 100 company. There's a lot more, I don't know how you call it, compassion showing through. And one of the good things is that they actually asked our group to start up a prayer for the company, the organization. And we actually got on the front of the website, the organization, right in the middle. And it was just incredible. That is definitely a God thing. So we'll talk a little bit later about building, a community of Christians in your organization. But I just want to share that one, that, from humble acorns, something can grow.
I think prayer is one of the most significant things that we can do, and whether we do it with other people or not, but actually praying for every decision that you're making, praying for the place that you're in. And it's interesting, I've worked with an atheist for a number of years, absolutely, and doesn't believe any of this, and yet we've talked about really tricky situations we've been going into, and we think about strategy. And then often before that, I'd say to him when he's going in, I'm going to pray for you in this, or I know you're going into this, I'll pray for you. Or I know you don't believe in prayer, but I will be praying. And really interestingly, the other week, I knew he was going into a very tricky pastoral situation, and he was having to write to somebody about it. And he texted me afterwards and he said, I was going to say, I'm sending you all good thoughts, and that seemed inadequate. So I wrote, your prayers are with us. And I felt, gosh, it's a very small shift, but it's a shift, isn't it? That he sees the power of prayer and begins to see the difference in that. Another
thing just that came to me there was just thinking about the group is Ecclesiastes 4:9, two are stronger or two are better than one, where one falls down, the other one can help them up. And I was just thinking about the three of us that started the prayer group in our company. It has grown, but out of the original three, one got really ill with COVID-19, really, really ill. And he was hospitalized for a long time. And to be quite honest, there was a lot of worries. He's recovering well, but, and we prayed and we prayed and we prayed. And so many people in the organization started praying for him as well. So, I do think we need to strengthen one another. And I'm a real believer. You've got to find out the other Christians in your organization, and you've got to come together, however that is. Prayer, is the way to start. But I think together we can be a lot stronger. So I would encourage that. So I think just moving on to the next question here, if I can ask you, Ruth, do you think in your experience people have a problem in expressing their faiths or beliefs in the workplace, maybe for fear of causing offence? Have you ever experienced that? Or
I think people are often afraid of being outed as a Christian, aren't they? And they think, and often because I think they fear they're going to be asked hard questions or maybe seen as judgmental or hypocritical. I mean, I think it's really just what I've said before. There's something about you need to start in a different place in this stuff. You need to know your own story. Yeah. And I think we often think my testimony is about how did I become a Christian. I mean, that's interesting. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be dismissive about it. The most interesting thing is, why are you still a Christian? What is it that God's doing in your life day to day? And being able to do that. I mean, I've honestly found nobody's asked me hard questions about creation. They haven't at all. But a friend of mine who's a biology teacher says they do. So she's reading up this great resources that Grasping the Nettle do that help you think about all that. And that's great for her, but these are not the issues that I'm coming across. What I found more is I've needed to kind of know what people are reading or watching, or to try and understand what's going on in that culture and be able to connect with it. And I remember there's a spell when everyone was reading The Life of Pi. I don't know if you've read that. And I was thinking, so I was reading it, it was kind of top list of novels. And this guy who worked for me turned around and he said one day, "Are you reading that, Ruth? Do you think the tiger in the boat is Jesus?" And I thought, I would never have had that conversation if I hadn't known what he was reading and what I was reading. And so I think there's a lot about knowing and looking for, not looking weirdly for opportunities, but just being attuned to the culture and being able to think, what's my Christian perspective? What as a Christian do I bring into this? And how can I speak about it?
Yeah, I don't know what you think, Kieran. What's your experience of that?
Yeah, I mean, I actually think there's a lot of, I think Christians sometimes, I think we have a little bit of a persecution complex. I think at times in Scotland, we think somehow everybody is out to get us and we think everyone is against us. And I think probably the last 6 months has shown that that is far from the case. That really is far from the case. And I think, we've seen, I think just last week, there was a study that Durham University had done, researchers a couple of weeks ago now, where they sort of measured how many people had engaged in some form of online worship during lockdown, and essentially they came up with a figure of 25% of the UK population had engaged in some form of worship, regular being monthly, as they've measured that, which is way higher than would normally have been the case, or what you would have thought, in terms of who would go in the doors of a church on a Sunday or whatever when we were meeting in person. Now, there's a whole bunch of limitations. That's a slightly different topic that you could end up going down. But I think what it shows is that actually there is an openness, there is a searching, because actually the figures were higher for younger people as well. So there's an openness to a form of spirituality, something bigger, a recognition that actually, as our world is getting shaken around us, there needs to be something more amongst a significant part of the population. It's not the majority, but it's quite a big part of the population. And so I think we just need to remember that having faith is not some kind of weird niche thing that it's only me and everyone else is kind of somehow against me. And I was even hearing a story last night of a friend who's got 3 colleagues in her team, and over the course of the last couple of years, 2 of them have started attending church or come back to church. And there's been sort of conversations around this in this team. And she'd and now one of the things that they're doing is they're now recommending books to each other. So some of them have got young children. They're now asking this person, "Oh, have you got any book recommendations on family life?" And so she's been recommending them a few different Christian authors. And the most recent one was the Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, the John Mark Comer one that's been out around sort of life rhythms and habits. And this person said to their colleague, they said, "Well, it is a book from a faith perspective, and I hope that's okay." And the colleague kind of turned around and they were like, well, what's wrong with that? I have some faith, and it was almost, it was almost like the Christian was so scared of, just assumed that this person wouldn't have faith, and almost had to apologise for the fact that this was a book that was coming from a Christian perspective. And actually, just none of that was there. And so I think, and I guess the final example, I suppose, I would just give is there was again during lockdown, there was a programme on BBC Scotland on a Sunday morning called Reflections at the Quay, which we were around about, involved sort of helping the producers in the background, getting speakers and things. And there was a whole range of different things, and it wouldn't have been a programme to everyone's tastes. But it became the second highest watched programme on BBC Scotland on a Sunday after the news. Had about 100 to 150,000 people watching it. And again, what was happening as part of that was faith was just being seen really for what it is, just for being a normal part of life. And again, I think we just need to kind of stop imagining often that there's barriers, that there aren't. Yes, there will be position. Yes, there will be challenges. Yes, there will be people who absolutely hate everything that we stand for. But let's not put all those barriers up. Let's let those things happen if they happen, and not go expecting that that's going to be where it starts.
No, that's a very good point there. I really enjoyed. Good answer there. We had a bit of a problem with the chat, but it's kind of opened up now. So we've got a whole heap of things in the chat. So my apologies for that there. A question from the floor. Do you think the impact of the pandemic will be good for the harvest or bad? That's a good question. Anybody want to chip in on that one?
I think it will depend how we respond. I don't think there's any glossing over the challenges that we're facing as a society. There's no glossing over the health challenges, the economic challenges, the personal challenges. But actually, if we can think in terms of how do we bring the kingdom into this individually and more collectively, and how do we respond in a way, if we as the church are focused on that, and as Christians are focused on that, rather than almost our own struggles and our own kind of challenges, even though many of us are going through the same challenges as wider society, I think there's an amazing opportunity. If we just go in on ourselves, I think there's big dangers that come with it.
Sure.
Actually, if the church is not relevant now, it's never going to be relevant in Scotland.
Absolutely. I've been talking to a group of young workers about this, and they said, stop talking about COVID. This just is our life at the moment. And it's almost like we present that as the problem. And they're saying, how are we going to do life just in the midst of that? And I think as Christians, there's something about what is it? How do we live? How do we bless in the midst of it? Are there new opportunities and maybe different ways that we can show the difference that Jesus makes in our lives through it? And I think it's just being open to that and being willing to think a bit differently and creatively.
Thanks for that there. Just a little observation from the floor as well, from somebody out there, just saying that the more vulnerable people are, the more open to Jesus. But are we aware enough of the struggles of our colleagues? Which is a very good point.
Yeah, I think that's really one of the significant things. And I think it's quite hard often if we're at a distance. So I think we have to work particularly hard. I remember there was one meeting I went on to, it was a board meeting, and we're supposed to be talking about somebody else, and you just could see all the faces in Zoom. And you're thinking, we can't have the conversation we're here to have. We have to let people say how they're feeling and find another time for that. So you can't always do that with work, but I think there's times to do that. And I think I referred to that earlier. I think we need to find, instead of clicking on just at the moment of our meeting, I think we need to open them a little bit earlier so as we can have some chat and conversation. I think that's really helpful, so as you get a sense of what's going on in lives, and you just have to be a bit intentional about that.
No, okay, that's super. Thanks for that, Ruth. There was a question that somebody's put on there, and it was one of my questions that was just coming up. So we'll just go to that one, I think. And it's really, yesterday, Jeremy and Neil, they were very good yesterday. They were quite clearly pastors who get it about the workplace. I think it's quite clear that they've strived to understand the workplace, which is so different from our meetings in church on Sundays. Do you think that pastors and church leaders in general don't get it? And it's to throw that out there. Obviously, being very sensitive, and
so,
but it's a real question. You know,
I feel I'm kind of going to hop on a bit of a hobby horse. I mean, I think the trouble for many ministers is that they're busy thinking about, their gathered church, and that's what they're paid to do, to think about the gathered church. How are they going to make it happen? Is the creche going to run? Are all these sort of things going to happen? They're really key parts of it. And when we started doing this transforming work program, which I'd really recommend if you want to think out what your faith is, it's an 8-part course that you can explore that. But the reason, when we were pioneering it and trying it out in Scotland, we would say to people, how's the church helping you? And it was young leaders between sort of about 20 and 30. What's going on in your church? How's your church supporting you? And they kind of say, they just get angry about it. I mean, they'd say, I'm treated like creche fodder or rota fodder. And that's what I'm really viewed as. And one person said, I remember my minister got up and he spoke about the banking crisis. He hadn't spoken to a banker. He didn't know what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
She said, I wouldn't talk about theology without checking it with him. Why is he not checking it with me? So then out of that, I think we felt quite depressed about that. But I've seen such a huge change in the last few years. And Jeremy and Neil were great about that yesterday, because they talked about what they felt their primary purpose was about equipping the church scattered to be all that they can be. So what I'm beginning to see is, for example, in our church, what we do is we have a this time tomorrow slot. I know lots of people do, and we bring somebody in and say, what is it you'll be doing this time tomorrow? And then we get to understand that, and we pray for that. We do things like we have our prayer diary, and the person who runs that has very diligently gone and spoken to people and said, what's your workplace? And popped in things that we could pray for that. And that's begun to change the atmosphere. I think the other thing I would say is that I think I've probably complained too much about it. Well, my expression. And I think what I've realised as we've become church scattered much more, I've been expecting my minister to sort out my discipleship. And so I realise that some of this is about me and having to work out take responsibility for my own discipleship. So I need to ask the Lord, where is it you want me to be? What is it you're asking me to do? And be confident to say to your pastor, no, I'm called to be in this workplace. That's where I will invest most of my time. So I think we have a job that can help ministers understand what's going on, what are some of the challenges, so that they can be responsive to that, and so they can preach and teach into that. And they can do things that enable us. I think Jeremy used the phrase, you guys are pastors in your workplace. And I think we have a huge role to help us pastor, and can we help them understand the issues so they can help us?
Fantastic. Yeah. Have you got an answer to that one, Kieran?
Yeah, no, I think, I would agree with most of the things that Ruth has said. I think, or perhaps all of them. I think that I think there can be a danger, I think, of a bit of an us and them. And often we talk about the sacred secular divide in the context of not, church leaders not thinking about workplace. And I think we need to be careful that we don't end up slipping into a reverse sort of, or they don't understand us, we can't, they just don't get it, and almost a sort of critical kind of spirit. And but I see opportunities. I think the challenges have been there. I've not been in this space as long as Ruth has, so I don't know what it was like a number of years ago. But what I do see now, and from talking to, I think, some of the leaders who would, for example, come and speak on our programme, perhaps when they were starting out 20 years ago, 30 years ago, they felt quite misunderstood and almost had to try and find their own fellowship, perhaps even with other leaders in similar kind of things, because they weren't able to get some of that in their church. Whereas I think now what I see a little bit more is just a bit more integration, actually, with a lot of the emerging leaders. Actually, you've got, often it will be people, there'll be leaders in their work and there'll be an elder at their church, or they will be, in a sense, they're talented folk who will be able to serve in a variety of ways. And I guess it's always for them, but also for the churches within that, thinking through, okay, well, how do you actually, what are you calling me to, Lord, in this season at this moment? And that might be for a time picking up more church commitments because you're in a season of life where work allows that. At other times, perhaps family life or work life means, do you know what, those are the priorities, and actually the sort of church leadership responsibilities, or helping the sort of functioning of the kind of church as we would think it as a kind of gathered institution, has to take a step back for a little bit. But I think there's opportunities. I don't see that as much. I hear a lot of people talk about that. I don't see that as much now in the kind of generation that's coming through, because I see more pastors who are wanting to understand what workplace is like, and I see more workplace leaders and young believers who are wanting to actually engage with their pastor rather than sit and say they don't understand where I am. I want to go and talk to them. And I guess that was what we would always be encouraging. So again, on the courses that we run, we would always look for the church leader to endorse an application. We would always want to say, okay, well, how does this formation that we're giving the people who come and do our programs, how does that then help them? That actually in turn helps the church. It may not be helping the church because they go home and they go back and lead a whole bunch of home groups or whatever, but it helps the church because actually you've got a more formed disciple who can bring something, whatever it is, for that particular moment.
Okay, that's good. Thanks for that. We got a message from somebody there, Ruth, just asking what was the name of the 6-point program, the LICC that you mentioned earlier. Could you just...
So the program I'm suggesting that you really would like to have a look at is the Transforming Work program. And if you go onto the licc.org site, you can see all the information about it. It's a series of films. There's a little app that goes with it. And it's a thing you can do online. We've currently moved our Transforming Work group online because we can't meet in person. Although we did have a barbecue when it was still allowed to have 10 people from 5 households. So we were doing that. So I would recommend it because it allows you to discover your own story and be able to articulate it. And it helps you really to get a picture of, your role as an image bearer of God wherever you are, particularly at work.
Okay, thanks for that, Ruth. We're just coming into land here, folks. The time's shot by there. Lots of questions. Sorry if I haven't answered everybody's question. Just Kieran, just over to you. We've covered a lot of ground here. Probably just scratched the surface of some areas. But what would be your closing thoughts, ideas be for people listening on what you think are the opportunities to reap a new harvest in these troubled times?
Yeah, as I think I've already alluded to, I think there's a massive opportunity at the moment, a huge opportunity for us as individual Christians and also as church communities, but also as communities of Christians wherever we're working as well. At the moment, and literally they go from the biggest to the smallest. So I mean, at its largest, we're looking at having to literally remake our world, rebuild our economies, rebuild our society. Rebuild the UK, rebuild Scotland, rebuild our cities that will become devastated in various ways, from some of the challenges that we are facing and that we will continue to face for the foreseeable. And there's a great opportunity there, I think, for us to think, what is that in whatever context I'm in? What does it look like to see the kingdom come a little bit more? What does it look like to be the voice of hope in the conversations when it's a struggle? What does it look like to support colleagues who are really, really struggling? What does it look like to, as I say, even in the face of redundancies and struggle to navigate that, whether that's something that we're going through ourselves or whether that's something that we have friends and family members and colleagues who are going through. I think there's massive opportunities here. I think really interesting features, I think, as well, is just has been perhaps some of the time and some of the step back that has been freed up in some contexts during lockdown. Every context is different. Some folk have had a lot less time, some folk have had a lot more time. But one of the things that I think has been interesting is that it's been an opportunity, I think, to perhaps stop doing some things that we just did because we did them. And we had to stop them, and now we think, well, actually, should we be restarting these things? Been the opportunity where a lot of church programs have not been allowed to happen for people to say, well, actually, how do I invest this time that I was perhaps volunteering at X or Y or Z through the week? And so I think there's a chance to just reset a little bit, but actually to be part of the solution to what needs to happen in terms of our society moving forward and in terms of our workplaces as part of that.
Fantastic stuff. Ruth, I just got to finish the last question for you, Ruth. Just a final word just from yourself. I've heard you say that we should be like twinkling lights in the workplace. How can we be those lights that everyone sees, particularly in the darkness of COVID? And more importantly, how do we keep them on just in the last minute and a half or so? Oh,
so Jesus said to us as Christians, we are the light of the world. We are that anyway. And I think as Christians, we're small individual lights. And we're put in places, when you put up twinkle light, maybe you guys don't do that, but when you put up twinkle lights, it's to make a place more beautiful. And the places that we work are more beautiful just by the fact that we are there and we bring the light of Christ there. And sometimes we get terribly busy thinking about strategies. And I think we need to be trusting the Holy Spirit to do his job in us and through us. We're often busy in activity, and it's actually, Lord, help me be a light shining. And sometimes we're asked to do hard things and show up a really dark. I could give you lots of stories where people have had to go in and show up a dark place. But actually, a lot of it is just to twinkle. And how do you twinkle? And I would say that is, first of all, whatever you do your job as it is the Lord Christ you're serving. Remember that, Colossians 3. It's the Lord Christ you're serving. Hold that front and centre. The second thing I would say is that kind of Hebrews 12, I think it is, fix your eyes on Jesus. You know, keep your perspective on Jesus. Sometimes I sit in meetings and I say, Lord, what are you thinking? As if he's sitting beside me, because I need to hold that perspective. Remember, he's with you. Get others to pray for you, whether it is in a workplace group or whether it is around your workplace. I've got a little prayer triplet, and they pray, and I can send things that they deal with confidentially. And I would say the other thing is be an encourager. Be an encourager of other people. And that because that encourages them and it encourages you.
No, I love that answer, Ruth. That was a pretty good point to be finishing on, to be quite honest. I have to just also apologise for a bit of technical issues for everybody out there, but our time for the questions has run out. And as I say, thank you so much, Kieran and Ruth. And it was really a pleasure to sit around the fireside with you. I might have to put another log on the fire, but a couple of things. We may be out of time, you know, Ruth, Kieran and myself, but we're going to be available if anybody wants to pick anything up that we've said or wasn't clear with us afterwards. Our details are in the lovely 38-page Thrive booklet, which hopefully most of you have actually seen. In fact, I dare describe it a booklet. It's almost like a book. You know, the amount of work that's gone into it, it's fantastic. And speaking of books, up in the top right-hand side of your screens, folks, there is a Thrive bookshelf up there. And if you do click in there, you'll get some great recommendations from some of the speakers through the Thrive conference. And I'd also like, just finishing there, just to tell you about tomorrow. My good friend, Dr. Tarika, is going to be talking about refresh. And it promises to be really engaging, very relevant. And you'll get your money back on your ticket if you don't feel refreshed after Dr. Tarika's session. And by the way, it was a free event, so there's no money coming back. And then Saturday is for a full day of talks. It starts at 10 a.m. and there's going to be some breakouts where we get to open the mics so you can actually share and talk amongst each other. And it'll be great to see some of you face-to-face on the virtual. But I'd like to thank you, just by closing, for everybody that's contributed, the questions that we answered, and sorry about the ones we didn't get a chance to answer. And I'd just like to say I hope you have a lovely day, reaping the harvest in whatever shape and form that takes. Thank you very much. God bless you.